Hi there, I'm Dunstatic, and I'm here today to talk to you about a game called Bravely Default, which is an old school, kind of, neo-old school I should say, turn-based JRPG by Square Enix for the 3DS. Now, I'm probably going to be spending most of this review praising Bravely Default, so if you don't really like the game, you may want to turn this off, or be ready to really disagree with me on a lot of things, because I will defend this game very strongly. Now, I mentioned that it's a neo old school JRPG, meaning it has turn-based combat that resolves after you put in all your commands for all your characters. This makes it pretty similar to games like Wild Arms or Breath of Fire, versus games like Final Fantasy 4, 6, 7, which had an active time-based system. Square Enix, I guess, went away from that a little bit, and to be honest, this plays a lot more like Final Fantasy Tactics, the JRPG, which is pretty fitting, because this game was originally conceived as a Final Fantasy game. More on that in a little bit. The combat is hard, I'll say the least. If you put it on the hard difficulty, which you should be doing if you like JRPGs, then you know that the difficulty and the fun is in overcoming the difficulty. If you do that, you're probably going to have a pretty tough time in early game and mid game. I know that I definitely did. In fact, I'm a veteran at these games, and even I had to reload about halfway to mid game, I would say. I had made a lot of mistakes in building my characters and realized them later and decided that it would be just better to take a clean slate, start from the beginning, and really get my feet under it. And I'm very glad that I did that, and if you're struggling, I highly recommend that you do the same. Despite it being a turn-based system, they've messed with the tropes of a turn-based system, as they've done with the story, which I'll get to in as much of a non-spoilery way as I can. So, although it is turn-based, they have given you a system, the Brave and the Default system, cleverly named, which replaces defense, sort of. Default is the defense action. It allows you to defend, reducing the damage you take, and storing that turn as a Brave point. Brave points are used to execute abilities, and to also give you multiple turns that will happen consecutively. They'll be resolved all at the same time, unless you use moves which are dictated at the beginning or at the end of combat, in which case those moves will happen when they're supposed to. You can Brave up to 3 times, and this means that you can get up to a maximum of 4 turns at once, which either you have to pay for upfront by just throwing down your 4 turns and then doing nothing while you recover your Brave points, which recover regularly at a point of 1 per turn, or store a bunch of turns with the default system and then Brave them all away, and then you can continue acting as usual. The second thing is what you're probably going to want to be doing for a lot of these tougher fights, whereas the first thing is a really good way to clear trash, which is actually a critical part of this game. They made regular fights quite difficult, which is refreshing. You're going to be using consumables, you're going to be throwing down your MP a lot. The typical classes, the standard Square Enix Final Fantasy classes are still here. Black Mage, White Mage, Red Mage, Knight, Monk, Paladin, all that. They're all here. So it really does feel like a Final Fantasy game. Some things are named a little bit different, like the Sword Master is a samurai, or whatever. I don't want to spoil too much of their classes for you, but they're really fun, and you should be prepared to use them to their fullest extent. And not only that, but I mentioned that this game plays like Final Fantasy Tactics, the RPG. If you played Final Fantasy Tactics, you know that you have a couple of options which reappear in this game. You can set a job ability that allows you to use all the abilities you've learned through another class as your current class. In addition, you can set some passive abilities. In Final Fantasy Tactics, they divided these based on movement and reaction and support. Here you just get ability points. Some abilities cost more than 1 ability point. You will get 5 total ability points for passives by the end of the game. The most that any passive I've ever seen cost was 4, and that's a special one. Usually they're 1 to 3. The ones that cost 3 generally tend to be more powerful than the ones that cost 1. You'll see a lot of 10, 20, 30% increases. You'll see a lot of doubling effects, halving effects. A lot of them are meant to be used in conjunction from different classes, so it really does support a sub-job kind of system from Final Fantasy XI, which I never really fully played, but I heard that the sub-jobs are pretty critical to being completely effective in endgame, or even in mid-game. which is very similar to how it is here. So, if you really enjoy that kind of combat, you're going to like this game. And it's made better by the fact that the storytelling calls on a lot of the old school, JRPG things, especially very strongly with the Square Enix themes of crystals, worshippers, devotion, weird religions, weird demons, weird angels, that sort of thing. Time travel, and all those things they love to throw into the Final Fantasy game, just cuts. One of the things that I really did like about the storytelling is that they give it to you piecemeal, but I also kind of disliked that. And the reason being, there's going to be a point in mid-game where you feel like you're going to be repeating the same sort of stuff over and over. And the fights aren't going to feel that different, and every time your reward is only like a little bit more of the backstory of these people who you've come to sort of, either identify with or hate or whatever the case may be. So my advice to you, if you're in that part of the game or you're just getting to it, is you just got to power through. Sorry, that's how it is. The story is pretty worth it, and the characters are believable, unlike some of their characters previously. Vaughn, I'm looking at you. Hope. Oh, God, Hope. Anyway, so get through that, and you're rewarded with some really fun and challenging boss fights towards the beginning of Endgame. I actually haven't gotten to the full Endgame because I am, believe it or not, stuck on a boss in a JRPG. I'm really excited to be able to say those words after 30 years. Yes, I'm It's a great feeling, actually, because I've been stuck on a couple of boss fights already, and I would have to go in and really rethink my strategy. There was one, and I'll give you this neat build idea that I used. I threw a bunch of passives onto a character and basically made him a suicide bomber. They kept killing him. There was nothing I could do, and he had all these passives built up from the jobs that he had leveled where things happened when he died, and he can recover from death by the next turn, sometimes. And I was like, you know what? If they're just going to keep killing him, then they're going to have to deal with explosions. And they did, and they died, and it was fantastic. That kind of innovative thinking when it comes to building your characters is what's really going to make this game for you. I remember being at work someday, and an idea would dawn on me, like, oh, I can use that as a sub-job ability, and if I pull those two abilities from those two classes, they'll probably synergize really well, and it'll double my efficacy when I use these actions, and just all sorts of crazy stuff that can go on. It really rewards that kind of organization and construction of a fully fledged party member versus here's the knight, here's the mage. That's great, in a game where that's the only option. But if you have these vast systems of character models, any kind of class that you can think of is here, and they all work together to make a really cohesive, and you can have neat characters. Hell, you can have a whole party of ninjas if you really wanted to. It'd be crazy effective. You might get a little bored because they all have kind of the same abilities, but it would work. Anyway, so clearly the game's got a lot of replayability as you think of these builds, and you're like, oh, that'd be so neat. I'm going to try to see if that works, go through. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. You can always grind, good old grinding. Grind up some abilities, grind up some job points. They put an ability where you just obliterate. It's called obliterate. At the beginning of combat, you just wipe out things that are a lot lower level than you. You don't even have to do anything. You just run around and gain XP and job abilities and gil. Actually, I don't think it's gil. I think it's like pink PG or something. Peak, that's what it's called. Makes grinding really, really enjoyable. You can just kind of move around while you're doing something else. Watch some Netflix, whatever the case may be. So, I'd like to also say, before I end this review about how much I just love this game, is that it is not a Final Fantasy game. It's very much not a Final Fantasy game. That series is going in different directions, and it's going in some pretty good and interesting directions, I'll be honest. I think 13, actually I just had an argument with this, with someone about this like a week ago, and they changed my viewpoint on it a little bit. 13 was an interesting game. They had to work out a lot of the kinks. There were some problems, but I really do think it was worth the time that you'd had to put into it. The end game for that was just beyond fun. I mean, the combat was really, really stellar towards endgame, which if you in the beginning of the game is like How could that be true? This is not a review of Final Fantasy 13. I just want to mention that they're going in different directions with their games. This game is going backwards, but in all the right ways. It is also its own IP, so you're not beholden to the fans of Final Fantasy. Bravely Default can have its own fans. It could be Bravely Default 2, 3, 4, Bravely Default Tactics, Bravely Default the fighting game, anything. It's great that Square Enix has this option to go and use this other IP, which is strong and has such a strong installment as its introduction. It really allows people, both old and young, who, maybe you're very experienced with JRPGs. Maybe this is your first real turn-based JRPG. You never played Breath of Fire 1. You never played Wild Arms. You didn't play... Shit, I can't think of, others off the top of my head, but there's so many. Lunar Star Story. Any of these games which we grew up playing, so you don't know what to expect. We know what to expect, but even we come into this and we're like, oh, that's neat. You did that. You let me take 4 turns at once. I can now cross these abilities in cool ways. Man, that's neat. Really warms the heart to be able to go back and see something that you loved so much be brought back and allow a whole generation to access it. Hopefully this is not going to be the last installment. I really, really hope that. And speaking of things which I hope is not the last installment, if I could ever speak, I am hoping to be bringing you a lot more of these videos. In the days to come, a lot more games that I want to review, even though I have precious little time to really play them. So I'm going to try to do my best for you guys. Remember, I'm Downstatic, or if you play Final Fantasy XIV, Zanesei Collide. Recently Aura on the Goblin server. Thanks, and that's all the time I got. See you.